Seaborn is a statistical plotting library in Python. It's built on top of matplotlib, which means when you run a Seaborn command, it runs a set of matplotlib commands under the hood. It's built with beautiful default styles for the graph, which makes it easier to read and comprehend. Seaborn is designed to work very well with pandas data frame objects, and therefore it's the go-to library for plotting data in Python. To install the Seaborn package, you would need to use the commands conda install Seaborn if you are using the Anaconda prompt, or otherwise pip install Seaborn if you are using the command prompt. So Seaborn can be used for analyzing different types of data by using different types of plots for numerical data, for categorical data, and even for data in matrix format. So let's start by importing our libraries and some data to work with. So here we will import numpy snp, import pandas spd, import matplotlib.pyplot splt, import seaborn as sns, and we will run a one line code matplotlib space inline. So this last line %matplotlib space inline, this will help to see the visualizations in the Jupyter notebook. Next, we will upload the dataset. So Seaborn comes preloaded with some datasets which we can use for practice purposes. So one of such datasets is called tips. To load the datasets, we can run the command sns.load dataset and just pass in the tips. So we can check the doc string here. It says load an example dataset from online repository. So this function provides quick access to a small number of example datasets. So we can use it for our practice as well. Let's run this. It will load the dataset. So let's check the head of the dataset. So this is our dataset. So it looks like it's from a restaurant. We have the total bill and we have tip data, and then we have some other categorical data. Now let's check the info. So in total it has 244 entries, range index going from 0 to 243, and 7 columns. Total bill, tip, sex, smoker, day, time and size. There are no null values here, and as we can see, the first two columns, total bill and tip, are float data. Then the next four are categorical data, and the last column seems to be integer data. So now that we have our data, let's move on to the style and colors. So now that we have seen different kind of plots we have available under Seaborn, it's good to know that we can control the aesthetics of those plots as well. So while working with Seaborn, we can set particular styles, context or color at the start to control the figure aesthetics, and those will be followed automatically for the rest of the notebook. We have these different methods here: set underscore style, context, figure size, and despine. So let's check those one by one. So first let's check the different styles we have available here. So here first let's plot a simple plot. We will use count plot. So data would be tips, and on the x-axis we will pass in the sex columns. So this will give us a simple count plot for the males and females. Now before this, if you type sns.set underscore and press tab, we will get these different options. We can to set different aspects of the graph. So for style, let's select that, press tab, check the doc string. So there are two parameters given here, style and none. So this sets the parameters that control the general style of the plots. So when you run this at the start of your session in the Jupyter notebook, whatever plots you plot after this, these set of arguments will control those plots as well. It will override the default options given on those plots. The style parameter controls properties like the color of the background and whether a grid is enabled by default. This is accomplished using the matplotlib RC params system. So for the style, we have four options here: dark grid, dark, white and text. This is basically the background of the plot we have here. By default, it is given as white. We have an option for dark and then white grid, dark grid and text. So by default, this style is given as white. So let's change this style to dark, and we have a dark background here. Let's say you want to use this dark grid. So dark will come with this grids. We have these lines which makes it easy to read the data. So right now we see this is more than 80 because the line passes just below the top of this count graph here. And then we have white grid as well, and there is an option given for ticks. So those ticks are basically this ticks which goes with the data. If you use just white, see we don't have those ticks here. So by default we had ticks here, not white background. Now for the same graph, let's plot this once again. We have count plot here. The data is tips data set, and on the x-axis we have the sex column. Now let's say you want to remove the spines. Spines are these outlines of this graph. If you don't want that, you can use the despine method. Let's pass this, and you see by default it has removed the top spine and the right spine. If you check the doc string, we have our figure and axis parameters, and then what we have here is top is passed as true. So when you run this, it will remove the top spine, then it will remove the right spine, and left and bottom are given as false by default. So if you want to remove the left and bottom spine, you will have to pass true for those two parameters. So this removes the top and right spines from the plot. So let's say if you want to do that, let's say we pass in true for both left and for bottom, and so this will completely remove all the spines are nothing but the axis of the figure, and this is the kind of graph you will get if you want that without passing true for the left and bottom. Those are given as false by default, so those two spines will remain here, and you can remove the top and right spine using the despine method if you want. Then after that we have a size and aspect ratio. So you can use matplotlib's plt.figure and then pass in figsize parameter inside that to change the size of the most of the Seaborn plots. We can also control the size and aspect ratio of most Seaborn grid plots by passing in parameters like size and aspect ratio. So let's once again plot our count plot. Data is equal to tips, and on x-axis we have sex. So what we want to do now is change the size of this figure. So for this, what you can do is, before your codes, we can use plt.figure. This is from matplotlib, and pass in the fixed size parameter. And if you check the fixed size, we have width and height in inches. So let's say you want to elongate the width of this graph. What we can pass in is, let's go with 12 by 3. So now there will be more width and less height. Let's say you want more general kind of squarish looking kind of graph, we can go with 5 by 3. You can go with 5 by 3 here, 5 by 4 here, or let's say you want a little bigger size, you can go for 7 by 8, which is more taller. If you want a smaller size, you can go with 4 by 3. 4 by 3 would basically means it has more width than height. Let's go with 12 by 3. This will have a lot of width. The width will be 4 times as the size of the height here. So this is 12 inches by 3 inches. Now this will work for non-grid plots, but if you have a grid kind of a plot, so for that we can pass in the size and aspect ratio inside that. So if you go back to the LM plot which we plotted earlier, if data is equal to tips, x is total bill, y is tip. So this LM plot is basically built on top of a facet grid, and if you check the parameters here, we have an option given for height and aspect ratio. So you can directly change the size using those parameters. Let's say if you go for height 10, it will give us a very large graph. Because the aspect ratio is 1, so when you pass in the height as 10, the width automatically adjusts as 10. If you go for height 4, it will be much smaller, and then you can change the aspect ratio, which is basically width by height. So if you want half the width, you can pass in 0.5, so the width will be lesser than the height. Or if you want double the width, you can pass in 2 here, and so it will have more width than the height here. So now one last thing I want to show you here is how to change the context. How to set the context here. So we have set underscore context method for that. Here we have parameters for context for font scale, and RC is equal to none. RC is short for runtime configuration. So this sets the parameter that control the scaling of the plot elements. So these are based on level size, line thickness, etc. So for context, we have 4 different options given here. These are paper, notebook, talk, and poster. So poster will have the biggest labels, and the size of the labels and fonts increase as you go from left to right. So paper is for your own use. You can have smaller fonts and label sizes. Notebook is little bigger than that. That is, if you are sharing a presentation with a small group of people on your laptop, you can use slightly bigger font size and level size so that they can see. Talk is done if you are for a much bigger room. Let's say you are giving a conference and people who are sitting at the back of the room, they can see from there as well. And then the poster will have the much bigger font size and level size, so that you can post that, let's say, on a tree outside your building, and people walking far away from that poster should be able to look at that from quite a bit of distance and be able to read it. And then you can independently change the size of the font as well. So let's say pass in your parameter context, and let's go for paper first. Let's check paper, and so this is the size of fonts and labels we have. Now notice what happened when I pass in notebook for this. So now you have slightly bigger font and labels. Now if I pass in talk here, you have even bigger fonts and label sizes. Now poster would be the biggest of all. Now you can independently change the font scale as well. So one is this size. If you pass in 10 here, see how big it becomes. So let's go with some smaller size. Let's change it to 2. So see, the size of the font and labels become very big here. So let's bring it back to font scale is equal to 1, or we can further go back to talk. So you saw how we can adjust the different aesthetics of the plots. We can change the context to change the size of the labels and fonts here. Then we can change the figure size. using figsize parameter under plt.figure. If you do it at the start of your exercise, all of the figures you plot after that will be of that size until you change it again. We can also remove the spines, and we can set different kind of background styles as well using set underscore style here. Now that's all for the Seaborn. Now Seaborn is very useful for deeper analysis, but if you are working with a data set and you want very quick analysis just for your own purpose, then you can actually use the pandas library itself and quickly plot those graphs for your own quick analysis. We will look at those in the next video. Until then, thanks for watching.